fishing boats depart a harbor at the same time. One traveling east, the other south. Okay. Before we do anything, what type of angle do we develop when we travel one direction south and the other direction east?
Right angle.
Right angle. Okay. So that is a huge part of this question. Okay. Says the eastbound boat travels at a speed of 2 miles an hour faster than the southbound boat. Do we know how fast the southbound boat travels? No, they don't tell us that. So if they don't tell us that, what should we let it be?
X.
Let it be X. Okay. So then the eastbound is going to be 2 more than that. So X plus 2, right? Pretty easy. Okay. Now understand, are those distances or are those rates? That's a rate. Okay. Rate. Rate. Now I'm going to draw in that because they say after these 2 hours, these two boats stayed on these courses and they're going to be 60 miles apart. When we say things are 60 miles apart, we go like the shortest distance possible, right? So from point A to point B. And that's going to be along that blue line, which that blue line is a what? The hypotenuse. And hypotenuse in this case, this value of 60, is that a distance or is that a rate? That's a distance. So, if you were a person that said, I know I put the information in and I used the Pythagorean theorem, but if you left the Pythagorean theorem in that form, if you went x squared plus the quantity x plus 2 squared equals 60 squared, you're wrong because you're relating rates with distances. The Pythagorean theorem is talking about distance squared plus distance squared equals distance squared, right? So I need to turn these things into distances somehow. And this is what people, and I did it on purpose when we read this, they glaze over that 6 hours. They think that's unimportant. Okay? But that 6 hours tells me if I traveled at a rate of x for 6 hours, okay, let's say x is 4 miles an hour, and I did that for 6 hours, do I know a distance from that? 6 times 4, right? So now if it's just x, 6 times x gives me that distance. Okay? And then this one obviously then is x plus 2 times that 6. Okay? I'm going to rewrite that as 6x plus 12. Is that okay? So people did that. And then I see people coming up to me saying, I've got all this work, and I've got the idea that I've got 6x. And I'm going to square that. Plus then 6x plus 12. And I'm going to square that. Should equal 60 squared, right? Because all that is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. It's the Pythagorean theorem there with your distances, correct? But now is where they make another mistake and they say, well, that's going to give me 6x squared when I square it. Does that give me 6x squared here? What's that really give me? 36x squared. Okay? Now, they're saying, okay, I got that, but now I make this, I change that to 36x squared plus 144. Is that right? Can I write that? It says 36x squared plus 144. Is that the only thing I need there? No, I got a FOIL, right? So I'm missing my O and I. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to multiply those two things together. What's 6 times 12? 72. And if I double that, I get 144. So I got 144x right there. Remember, you got to FOIL that out. And then the last part, 60 squared, 3600. Okay. So this is going to give me what? 72x squared plus 144x. Subtract that 144 over. Subtract 3600 over. Gives me 3456. Alright. Now I'm looking, that's an ugly quadratic, right? Okay, big numbers. So if you're a person that says, hey, I see big numbers, I automatically go to quadratic formula, that's fine. But what I'm seeing in this row here is that 3600 is a factor of 36, right? Or 36 is a factor of 3600. 36 is also a factor of 144. So I'm thinking here I could probably divide, and 72 is twice 36, right? So there's a lot of common values in here. I'm thinking that that's all probably going to divide by 72. I know 144 does divide by 72, so I want to see if this 3456 does. And what do you know it does? So if I divide everything by 72, I get x squared plus 2x minus 48 is equal to 0. And now that's something we should be able to factor pretty easily. Because x minus 6 and x plus 8. X is 6. X is negative 8. Okay. And if you were to use the quadratic formula right here, it's perfectly fine, nothing wrong with that. You're going to get really big numbers, but hopefully we're going to use our calculator to kind of muddle through that for us. But you'll get down to integer solutions. Okay. Whenever you use the quadratic formula and you get down to really nice solutions that don't have a radical part to them anymore, that tells you that, factor by grouping, or in this case we use the product sum technique. It tells me one of those shortcuts would have worked instead of the quadratic formula. Does that make sense? So now x is, what was x representing up in our problem? The rate. Okay. So a rate, just a speed, correct? Okay. So can it be negative? Zach, I know you're slow, but negative 8, pretty slow, right? Okay. So we can't have that. All right. So 6 has got to be our rate. And there's a built-in check for this if you want to make sure you've done this right. If 6 is x, and this would be 36, correct? Okay, that distance. And this distance here should be 36 plus 12, 48. So trying to be able to take 36 squared plus 48 squared and see if that gives me 3600. And if it does, I know that's a right triangle, and I've satisfied the fact that we went southbound and eastbound from one another. And I told the last class this, what I like about this question is you got to pull from some previous math courses, right? You got to pull from geometry, 7th grade and 8th grade math, distance equals rate times time. And you got to piece things together to get, and even algebra 1 and algebra 2, by developing these and foiling those correctly, to end up with something that we're currently working on. All right. So it's very important that we are able to pull from previous courses. Okay? That's why they give you prerequisite requirements to get into this course. A lot of things in this class are going to be that way, where maybe we're working on the quadratic formula, but we got to use maybe 2 or 3 or 4 ideas from previous courses before we can get to that quadratic equation that we're working on. So keep that in mind as we move through. Somebody said question 7. They wanted to go over that. Does this make sense now? We feel comfortable with that one?
Mr. Fake, I don't want to be this guy, but
well, be that guy.
When I did this question at home, I did, computationally speaking, I did the same thing you did.
Okay.
But I got a really ugly quadratic, and it wouldn't go down to anything else.
Can somebody hit the red button on top of the camera? It's like towards me.
I can't see it.
They give you, and we're going to try to rewrite that for a specific variable inside that formula. Okay. So to solve the equation for the indicated variable, we want to solve for n. Okay. When we look at that, on the right hand side, we have multiple values or multiple occurrences of n, right? And if I just leave it that way, that becomes problematic. Okay. So what we want to do is just start going through this and rewrite it as s equals. Now I'm just going to distribute that n through. So it gives me n squared plus n all over 7, correct? Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by 7, right? Okay. So I'm going to get 7s is equal to n squared plus n. Okay. I want to solve for n, so I'm going to get everything equal, because it's a quadratic equation, correct? So I'll get everything equal to 0. That's what it would be really nice if we got to this point. Says, now remember you got to factor. Okay. But the algebra, that line of math tells me you got to factor. So we're going to go 0 is equal to n squared plus n minus 7s. Okay. Now that's pretty ugly, right? You got multiple variables in there. We can't really factor that using A times C method or factor by grouping, do the same thing, or the product and sum technique. So what's the default way of factoring a quadratic equation? Quadratic formula. Okay. So, and that's going to be nice because that's what we wanted to solve for, right? That variable. So I'm going to say n, remember, is the opposite of b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, just be careful here, because when they talk about a, b, and c, that one is a, that one there is b. Those are the coefficients for n, right? Negative 7s, that's terrible. Negative 7s, that thing right there is your c term. Okay? So we go opposite of b. That would be negative 1 plus or minus b squared, that's going to be 1 again, minus 4, a was 1, but now c is the negative 7s. So negative 7s all over then 2a, which is just our 2. And that's what n should be equal to. Now just cleaning that up a little bit, we'll have n equal to negative 1 plus or minus 1 minus 4 times negative 7. Well, that product there is going to be positive 28, right? So I get 1 plus 28s all over 2. Okay? And I think if you were to type that in that way, you're done, you're fine, it marks it correct. But if you look at the way it's presented as an answer there, they do something a little bit differently. They come down and they say, okay, if I've got negative 1 plus or minus this stuff, 1 plus 28s, I got that all over 2. Well, that means I can do this. Right? Okay? Which still is not the same as what they have there, correct? Okay, still got that 1/2. So what they do, we see we got a 1/2 here, we got a 1/2 there. They factor out that 1/2, and I think they factor out a negative 1/2, don't they? Nope, just 1/2. We get 1/2. Factor out 1/2 out of there, you get just a 1, right? And then plus or minus this thing, when I factor out a 1/2, I just get the 1 plus 28s. Okay. Then they just type it in as 2a because there's not a plus or minus character on your keyboard. So they just type it in as 1/2. And then for some reason they use the associative, or sorry, the commutative property, and they write the radical first, and then plus the 1. And then they write the 1/2, the radical, and then minus the 1. Okay? You don't necessarily need to do all that stuff to get the right answer. Basically, the way web assignment works, just like Math Excel used to work, is in the background there might be 7, 8, 9 different expressions that they're trying to match to. And if you hit one of those expressions, you're fine. So maybe it is. Email me that question. I'll fix it for you. So here's what I hate this, but it is something we want to pay attention to. Not necessarily maybe for this class, but maybe for like a physics class or something like that. That's a capital S in there, right? Okay, you put in a lowercase s and I marked it wrong, so it's not. That's a very small minor detail. I'm going to give them points for it. But pay attention to that, because in like a physics class, you might have a capital S that means one thing, and a lowercase s that means something completely different, right? Okay. So we got to pay attention to that stuff. I'm not gonna mark your question wrong because of that mistake. It's kind of silly. Anything else? Any other problems? You good, Jarrett?
I'm good.
At what? Okay. Any other questions? We're okay? Feel comfortable with this stuff?